All right, so this episode of the podcast is one that I've really been looking forward to for a very long time. And that's a new series that we're going to be trying out on the podcast. It's going to be called Anatomy of Segments. So this episode is going to be Anatomy of an Explosion. And you heard that right. We're literally just going to be talking about explosions for this entire episode. So if for whatever reason you're not interested in that, you're probably not going to like this episode or any of the other content that we make. But if you enjoy life and you are energized by action and adventure, I think you may enjoy this episode. Today I'm joined by Urban Bradesko from Rebelway. Urban has a really extensive background in creating realistic explosions simulations, which I felt like he was a perfect guest for this episode, and he's really going to help us break down some iconic shots that we've been discussing more recently, the different types of explosions, and how to make realistic explosions inside of a simulation. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode. Hey everybody, Luke Thompson from ActionVFX here with another episode of Ask an Artist. Today's episode is a little bit different from what we've done in the past. Instead of having an artist and deep diving on their background specifically, we're going to pivot over a little bit and do an anatomy of segment. So this first one, as a trial run, is going to be anatomy of an explosion. So we'll talk a little bit about, the difference between real explosions, CG explosions, and kind of the processes that go in. But it's going to be really fun. Like, I've honestly been so excited to plan this one out. It's been something I've wanted to do for a while, because why wouldn't we have a full episode solely dedicated to explosions? So I'm joined today with my guest, Urban Bradesko from Rebelway. He is a very, very talented CG and VFX artist, and we'll get in a little bit to the conversation that led him to be here. But for now, welcome to the show, Urban.
Dude, it's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I would never miss an opportunity to not talk about explosions. I mean, it's just the best thing ever.
I love it. Yeah. So kind of just a quick intro of how we got connected through this, and then we'll kind of dig into your background briefly. But our head of production, Zach Van Hoy, and I were discussing one day, there was a new trailer that came out for Red Notice. So it's a new Netflix film that's coming out. And it had this beautiful, beautiful explosion sequence. And in the office between Zach and I, we kept going back and forth of like, that's real. No, it's CG. Because, no, okay. And so it got to the point where we needed some more expert opinions. We needed some more eyes on this because we really weren't sure, but we knew that it was gorgeous and we wanted to kind of learn more about it. So as I know that Urban is also a big fan of explosions, I hit him up on LinkedIn and was just like, hey, so really strange question. I don't know if you have been asked this before, but what's your professional opinion on this explosion? So I sent him the link, sent him some screenshots and that kind of thing. And I just got to say, that's not really a relationship that I know that I have with anyone else in the world, aside from, like your internal team. I'm just like, hey, can I get your professional opinion on how this is done? And Urban had some really great insight on, it probably being a mix of both, just because of some of the characteristics of each sequence, shot in the sequence. So it was really cool. Just wanted to kind of plug that in there as like, that's what really spawned this whole conversation of like, hey, Urban quite literally makes some of the best CG explosions that I've ever seen, as far as realism and just the time and effort that goes into all of the detail. So this was just a really natural progression for like, hey, we're doing Anatomy of an Explosion. I want Urban on this episode. So that's kind of everything leading up to here.
Yeah. And honestly, like that sequence, it looks amazing. And I saw it a week before we had our conversation, and I was thinking the same thing. I stopped it. I was like, this feels too good to be a CG explosion. And then you go into it. Why does it look too good? Like, would a CG explosion even be able to look this good with all the tools and the stuff we have, And I'm almost 100% sure it's a mix. Like, the first explosion was CG. The second one was a plate. And yeah, you can definitely see it in the edges, like the way they were keying it, which I feel was a sloppy key. Like I feel like they could have done a bit better on that key. But it was still like that explosion and the shot was looking great. But that's what gave it away the most, and it was just too detailed. Like it's so difficult to get that on a CG explosion. Yeah, it's very difficult.
It was a really nice mix of the key, or sorry, not the key, but the CG and real element. Like it was just very complementary, as it's supposed to be. But I think it just hit all the right marks as far as like, this is beautiful. Like it feels real, but it's also huge and just very complementary to each other.
So do you think for the second shot that we think that is a plate shot, you think they just used your assets like from ActionVFX, or you think they shot their own assets?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was kind of pixel peeping during that, and there's always YouTube compression and other things going on, it definitely is possible, just the way that we have R3D files and stuff, so if someone preferred to key it themselves, they could definitely do that. But it was almost like there was a lack of resolution when it got that close. So it would be possible, because ours are large scale, and so they all stay in the frame. So it would be possible that they would kind of bring that forward for that one sequence, because it was just a very fast, hero shot of that happening. But I'm not sure. Maybe we'll learn after the fact, once the VFX breakdowns come out.
Yeah, that would be cool to see if they actually used your assets. And
that would be a killer one. I'll see if I can stay on track for that and track them down.
Yeah, for sure.
So one thing that I wanted you to kind of just dig in a little bit on is your background, Urban, before we jump into all the juicy details of different types of explosions. How did you get into like CG simulations and then work your way up to Rebelway?
Dude, it's been a long road, but I started as a filmmaker. Like a videographer. I don't know what the correct term would be, but straight out of high school, I kind of formed my own studio. And with that studio, it was just me and a couple of friends. We also had an online TV station so we had two different studios. One was the TV station, the other one was kind of the commercial music video side of it. And yeah, that's what we did for like 5 or 6 years, just like shooting stuff. And it felt like more and more clients they were asking, oh, can you add some 3D titles here and there? Oh, what about this? Can we do something like 3D in this commercial? And I was always, I didn't want to say no. I was like, yeah, sure, we can do everything. So I started learning After Effects, with Andrew Kramer and then I kind of started learning Cinema 4D, and then from there it was just so cool to make explosions. But there was never, like, all the other tools besides Houdini were kind of lacking a lot of features. It was difficult to make explosions or destruction. And then I kind of slowly switched to Houdini, even though it was super painful. Houdini is so difficult. We tried to make it easy, with Rebelway, and actually teach you how to do all of this, because it is like the learning curve. It's freaking, it's insane. It's
a different world for sure.
Yeah, but that's kind of how I got my actually the first explosion I did was for a music video, and it's horrible, absolutely horrible. It's done in I was using Maya and FumeFX, and not to take anything away from those two packages, but it was my knowledge as well. I didn't know anything. I just followed the tutorial. It was an explosion. I didn't know how to fix the stepping. I didn't know how to add more resolution. It took like 2 days to sim it. And
oh man.
And I really enjoyed the process of creating something, of simulating something. And I was always obsessed with fire and stuff like that. Like I used to set things on fire. Like I once poured like gasoline on my table and set it on fire. It was just
I bet your family appreciated that.
Yeah, for sure. But I was a pyromaniac like before I went into the CG and everything. But yeah, that first explosion that I did, and because it looked so bad, I was like, I need to investigate. Like, how do you get better at this? And then you find, I started doing some explosions with Cinema 4D, but that was limited again. But then I switched to Houdini, and then I started learning, all of the stuff that you can do with Houdini, like fluid sims and destruction and particle stuff. It's just, and then explosions as well. But explosions was kind of, the thing is, like, you saw really good explosions in those AAA blockbuster movies, but there was no tutorial on how to do something to that quality in Houdini. There was always a disconnect. So I was always digging, like, how do you actually do a proper explosion? Like, what's the secret? And dude, it took me like freaking 7 years to finally, like, when we did that promo for Rebelway with the explosions, that was the first time I was like, I did it.
Yeah. Man,
it's a check mark.
That one was so killer too. And the fact that, like, because you say like 7 years, I would 100% believe that, just because of the amount of time and effort that goes into your courses at Rebelway. And I feel like anyone that I've talked to that's taken one or been a part of, any of those training sessions has immediately seen the value. Not to mention, your final shots are just so killer. And, like, I think that's the biggest seller of any course, any educational content, tutorial, whatever, is like, if the final thing is not super dope, then I'm not going to want to take my time to learn how to do it. I think that's just most people.
100%. Yeah, it's me and Saber. We worked on that one. He did all the rendering and shading. Like, he did an amazing job. I did all the assets. And then we work like that. We work together. Like, in mixture, like, we don't have any set of rules, but sometimes I do the assets, sometimes he does them, and then we render them, do a good comp and put some glow on top.
Drop some glow, some pepper in there.
Yeah. But I think, like, that's the thing I feel like that pushes us forward with Rebelway is the final output that we do. And we actually show how to do it. So we try to get as close as possible to provide, it's like a studio quality level of education, and we spend a lot of time tinkering with these trailers. Like, we actually do it as if it was a studio project. Like, working at Rebelway is not different than working in a studio, because we all, like, the people who are at Rebelway, we all worked at studios, or we sometimes still do commercial projects, like, on the side. So we just run it as a studio, and then we do these cool projects, and we try to turn them into training for other people to actually know how it's done. So that's so cool. And it's all, like, practical, very real world, examples of this is something you're going to encounter. Exactly. We don't try to do anything super fancy, or even, like, we just released, like, a new water effects workshop, like, advanced. It looks freaking killer. But we are always very careful with, sure, if you have a 500 gigs of RAM in your machine and you just sim billions of particles, you're going to get a very detailed result. But we are always careful not to go that way, because then nobody will be able to actually follow along. So, we are always, we don't want to put any stupid tricks. Like, what you see is what you get. Yeah.
That's great. So, kind of transitioning over into the explosion specific segment of this episode. And I will say, for all of our listeners, this podcast is available on a number of different platforms. This episode specifically is going to have a lot of visual things with it. So we'll be showing a lot of videos, a lot of overlays, images, trailers. So, Urban, we'll do our best to kind of describe through audio how beautiful these things are. But at the end of the day, if you've got the time, I would recommend putting this up on YouTube. That way you can kind of see more of the specific things that we would be showing as we talk. So that was my preference.
Sweet.
So let's jump right in. Urban, in your opinion, your professional opinion, what makes a good explosion?
It's all about the shapes. It's all about the shapes, baby.
Could you elaborate on that a little more? What specifically about the shapes kind of?
Yeah. So you have a few different levels of shapes when it comes to explosions. You have your big, like, I feel like explosions are, it comes down to just knowing your composition. So, because even a real life explosion can look very boring. You shoot it off, it's going to explode, but it doesn't mean it's going to explode in an interesting way. It can have only one big shape.
Yep.
That's going to be defining it. But when you're really going into it, like with CG, you have more control. So you always want like 3 big shapes, and then like 10 medium shapes, and then like 100 small shapes. So that's going to kind of follow a Fibonacci sequence where it has an exponential growth. And it's the same thing with destruction or any piece of art. It's the same, all the same principles apply. But yeah, you just need like very cool, interesting shapes. So you need like big shapes that define, like, imagine like 3 spheres on top of each other, but not all of them are the same size. Like one is a bit smaller, one is the main one, and then you have the second one that's kind of complementary. And then you have a lot of small shapes. Those would be kind of the turbulences on those spheres.
Yeah.
That are kind of eating inside the sphere. I know it's difficult to explain this. I hope we're going to have like a lot of cool
we will. Yeah, we'll have plenty,
images,
of visuals. Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like that's kind of it. But then you also have like secondary shapes, like the trails that are accompanying. And then everything, when you put everything together, it almost feels like a flower is growing. So you have, a flower has, what's the top of the flower called? Like a petal? No,
the petals. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have the petals, then you have the leaves, and then, the main core of the flower. That's how an explosion should go up. And you always look at, nature is kind of the best teacher when it comes to shapes, because everything is in golden triangles and rules and Fibonacci. Like if you look at a tree, it's a perfect example of a Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah.
That's how an explosion should look like.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we can kind of dive a little bit into, because I know that I'm big on definitions and clarification. So the term explosion could really mean, there's like 10 subcategories that are coming to mind right now. As far as like art direction, different style. So I've got a couple notes here, and I'm just going to kind of run down the list as to some of the most popular. Urban, feel free to stop me at any comments or challenges to my list here.
Sure.
And if there's anything I miss, we can definitely cover as well. So the first one, and probably the most popular, I will say, would be the gas explosion.
Yes.
So these types of explosions are characterized by generally a deep orange and red, a lot of yellows, just a lot of like depth and color to them, and usually a lot of dark smoke as well. So these are, like, for the products that we have, the gas explosions, we have volume 1 and 2. Volume 1 was filmed at night. Volume 2 was actually captured against the blue sky. So it does retain a lot of those dark smoke, just the depth.
There's a
and
contrast.
That really, the contrast, it adds so much more to the effect as a whole, especially when, we're making something that's as close to drag and drop as we can get it. To have something of that scale be able to do that is pretty fascinating, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a classic Hollywood explosion. That's the go-to one, even especially when they go for slow motion shots. That's the one.
Yep.
That's also a very difficult one to reproduce in CG, because it has so many different details that you have to be just to watch.
Yep.
For when I do it, I did one for a cinematic, and it was a big pain. Like we had to invert the shaders and do some very cool ramps to get that flamey look to it. But for the smoke, I actually had to use a separate simulation because I couldn't get it all in one sim to make it look exactly like the reference that I had. So there was a second smoke sim, and that second smoke sim was actually darker to get those, very dark smoke elements. Because in the same sim, it just didn't want to cooperate.
Yeah, it's really challenging, and also to get that like illumination the way that it's supposed to, right? Because like an explosion of that level, that size, is giving off light, and so to have that calculated on the smoke that's also engulfing it while still having that dark contrast. It's a very, very interesting kind of scientific mixture that has to hit all those main points. But when it happens, you can tell like, ooh, that's a nice one. So next one I have on my list is an impact explosion. So this is more of a dust and dirt type of explosion. It's characterized by more impact and less fire. So a lot of these will be more like, one kind of specific use coming to mind is like a World War I sequence where someone throws like a hand grenade and, you know, there's just a lot of like loose dirt on the ground and it creates this big impact where there's not really any fire from it. But it is kind of just like that dust shockwave that comes out of it. Do you find yourself kind of incorporating a mix of those sometimes?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, an explosion like that is mostly built from other elements than just like smoke and fire. You have, you need grains, you need particles, and you need like the ground like RBD simulations. So it's funny, like if you're actually building those sims, I mean, those explosions in Houdini, you really need to, like, all the elements that go into it and how are they gonna combine, all the layers are gonna make one explosion look good. So those are very fun to make just because it's not just a pyro sim. It contains other simulations, but they're cool.
Extremely detailed with, whether that's like sand particles or like larger chunks of debris that are kind of trailing out. Very cool. I love those. I love all of these. Like, who am I kidding? There's not one that I'm like, that's a pretty lame, weak explosion. Next one on the list is spark explosions. So these are characterized by trailing sparks. Often, I'll see these used a lot with like electrical things that are taking place. So if like there's a transformer on a power line that explodes, or a power plant or something, usually those will kind of just be the main thing. Not really, and they're very much particles. So it's not a lot of fire, not a lot of impact necessarily. But the cool thing about the spark type of explosions is they can kind of just be peppered inside like a larger gas explosion, just to give it a little more like trailing, a little more character for the sequence that's taking place. I feel like that's something, if you watch in a lot of action sequences, it's never really just one explosion or one thing unless that's dependent on the storyline. But it's always like how all of these can kind of be combined and mixed to create that full immersive feeling of the story.
Yeah, when I think about those kind of explosions, it's always Michael Bay. I feel like whatever he does, it's gonna have that kind of sparkly thing on top.
It's gorgeous, and I can't do this entire episode and not mention Michael Bay. It's just such a staple of like, directorial style. And also I was talking on Instagram with our audience, just kind of promoting this episode, like, hey, what do you guys want to talk about? And I said, I'm looking at you, Michael Bay, and I tagged him. And he actually watched the entire set of Instagram stories that we posted about the episode. So, Mr. Bay, this message is to you. I would love to have you on the Ask an Artist podcast to give us some info on explosions and everything else. So this is my official request.
If you get him on the show, I need to be here as well.
Yes, we'll
there's
turn it.
No way.
We'll turn it into an expert panel and change the format up. We'll figure it out. We just kind of make this thing up as we go along anyway. So we'll do that.
Yeah, that would be so cool to have. Like he would have so much knowledge as well as to how, like, I have so many questions for him if he would actually be here. But like, it's just how dangerous it is to have all of those explosions like on set. Like how much prep, what regulations do you need? I guess a lot of those questions, because answers to those questions, because you guys do real explosions, right? So how, like, you need to be 100 feet away to secure the perimeter or whatever.
Yeah, but I would imagine that in those, because when I think of like, is it Detroit maybe, where some of the Transformers films have been shot? Somewhere like larger, cities.
Yeah.
And the restrictions there are like night and day from where we shoot. Thankfully, and if we're talking like LA or anything, the second you pick up a camera, you're being charged for something. And our area where we're at, like, thankfully we have a lot of like farmland type of things, a lot more like open spaces. And so being based in Tennessee, the laws are a bit different. But there is still a really high level of like safety precautions whenever we have our specific pyrotechnicians making explosions that are 40 feet tall. Because there's different guidelines for, what types of materials can be used. If they go up to a certain classification of explosive, then we need another person there that's registered to handle that type. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. And it's cool that as we kind of grow the company, we're able to jump through a lot more hoops than we would have, if it's like day one and we hope that products will sell and that people will like what we're making. So I'm hoping as we continue to grow, we'll be able to do a lot more ambitious types of explosion using like det cord and more high class explosions. So that will be fun.
Dude, I really want to join you guys when you shoot these.
Yes.
I've never been in person. I never witnessed like a huge ass explosion before. So
we need to just put like, we'll do an open invitation for like all podcast guests, and we'll pick some, we'll do a raffle giveaway where you can come for other users and listeners on set, because that would be really fun to do. And then everyone will shoot the flamethrower and we'll get to blow some stuff up.
Yes.
Sounds like a plan.
Now we're talking.
Nice. So I've got two more explosion classifications or types. I'll just go through them very quickly. The next one is aerial explosions. So these are characterized by little to no interaction with a ground plane. These are otherwise known as zero gravity explosions. For, maybe you have an airplane that's hit in the air. There's a plane it's interacting with. Dad joke, sorry. But not like a ground plane to where, there would be like a lot of billowing surface in a specific direction because they kind of just go out evenly. And another thing, like we have a couple different types of aerial explosions that we offer. But I've seen a lot of people be able to utilize those for like top-down drone, bird's eye explosions, because it works enough to kind of look like that explosion's coming towards the camera. But I've always appreciated those as well. Kind of like with everything else, they have their time and place for, when they can be best utilized.
Yep.
And then last, but certainly not least, nuclear / mushroom cloud explosions. These are characterized by distinctive slow movements, since they're just freaking huge. And the scale is just always so massive, and they're generally accompanied or more, characterized by the shockwave that comes out. So depending on the art direction, what that looks like, there can be a lot of different styles that go in, even in like the mushroom cloud level. But I think a nuke is just kind of the best way to get that like word picture in your mind. And this is something that we have been wanting to do like from day one. It's like, let's do nukes. What do we have to do nukes?
Like real life nukes?
I'll take what I can get. I'm not going to say that I haven't tried to make calls to get us on military bases.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll say that I've tried, but turns out people don't like you coming to watch or film when they do that kind of stuff. But I'm going to keep asking and keep trying, because eventually one will be a fan of the show and we'll be able to take our red there and film some big things. I don't know. Where do they do that? In Hawaii or the desert somewhere?
Yeah. Do they do them a lot? Like, I have no idea what's the schedule for nuclear explosions.
Yeah. I mean, obviously a lot of those things are pretty classified. They don't really want you to know when and where they're happening.
Every Monday at
every
2
Monday,
o'clock, we do a test.
3:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I think.
Yeah.
So that would be one thing that, we would obviously have to, the majority, rely on those being CG. But I've still seen some absolutely beautiful large-scale explosions. Urban, have you made any of those scale yourself, or just through your courses with Rebelway?
Yeah. So in that explosion workshop that we have, like the final shot is a nuclear, like it's not the biggest nuke, but it's like a mid-scale nuke explosion.
Nice.
And that was super fun to make. It's completely different than making anything else because you just need to pump so much stuff into it to make it behave properly, going up so it starts. And there's a bunch of different types of nukes as well. In most cases, they form that mushroom. Not all of them, but that depends on the scale and the force of the impact.
Mm-hmm.
But with nukes, you always get like additional elements forming on the side of the explosion, like a gas gathering or like rings. You get rings a lot of times, and you don't get those rings if you go in Houdini and you're like, yep, I'm gonna, even if you're correct, like physically real world correct, you put in this amount of gas, this amount of force when it explodes, you're not gonna get those rings. The solvers are not made or written.
They don't account for the atmosphere and
they don't.
Air.
Exactly. They don't know what. Essentially, Houdini doesn't know you're doing a nuke. So all of those elements you have to add separately. So then again, it comes to art directing. Like, what do you want? How do you do it? And then you need to make those two elements kind of speak to each other. So like the rings are actually kind of being affected by the main explosion, and it's a lot of elements. It's a bit different than other explosions, but also you need like a better computer when it comes to this. Like it's difficult to do it without a good computer. You just need a lot of RAM. Your CPU needs to be good, otherwise there's no other way around
otherwise
it.
you'll be filming your computer that's doing the exploding.
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great. What would you say are kind of some go-to tips for creating realistic and convincing CG explosions?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the way you shade it. Like the shader and the material is going to be the most important. Like the way that fire inside of the explosion is kind of bleeding through the smoke. That was a big mystery for a long time when it comes to explosions. Some people had it figured out. I think ILM, or maybe it was double negative, like one of those studios had a good workflow, and it was called a scatter workflow. Now it's actually in kind of by default done in Houdini. But I think that's the biggest thing that those big movies had that we couldn't reproduce. Like we even like working in a studio, we didn't have that workflow. We were always looking at how do you achieve that? And the realistic way would be to actually have a light inside of the explosion. So use the temperature fields as a light source, and that kind of got you half down the road. But the problem was it became very slow to render, because then you have that light traveling through all the voxels and you have a million bounces, and it becomes super slow. So the scattering technique that we have now, and we show how to customly build one in our explosion workshop, it's essentially fake. It's a fake scattering technique, but it works beautifully. Like it just makes it look like a real explosion. It gives you that crunchy, crispy chicken detail that you need, like on the edge of the explosion. But that's the setup would be a bit different for those gas explosions. But I feel like that's the biggest thing when it comes to CG stuff, is how does your shading look? Because even with some of the presets that you get now with Houdini, you can make a good explosion. Like they're going to make it easier and easier for you to just have like a one-click, a very nice explosion. But then you still need to art direct it properly and shade it properly to get it to look nice. So that's not going to be there will always have to be an artist looking at it, and it is an artistic process. Like it really is. It's not just It's not super technical. It's not going to be technical anymore, because back in the day, like three or 4 years ago, like we had to do so many little custom tricks to get those nice details on the edge, because usually when you did an explosion, and if the explosion was too fast going upwards, you would get those very clean mushroomy shapes, like very characteristic of a CG explosion. And then you had to do some weird noises like on the edges, like with some tricks essentially, because you couldn't just put disturbance on the whole thing. You needed to find out where is the edge, and then just do the displacement on the edge to make it look, and you had to go inside the solver, did a bunch of stuff, but then it made the simulation even slower. But now with all the improvements, I feel like very soon you won't need to do any of that. It's just going to be how you shade it, and it's going to be more artistic, not so technical. Yeah,
that is really cool. And so when you mentioned the scatter workflow, is that mainly in regards to the light scattering?
So you get essentially illumination from the temperature, right? Inside the explosion, because you have that fire happening inside. So it's all about how that temperature is then, how you see the temperature through the smoke.
Gotcha.
And that's,
so as it distributes and that's really cool. And that makes sense, because even as we were discussing earlier about how that illuminates all of those dark edges, the dark smoke, and I mean gas explosions are very hot, obviously, and so there's just a lot of that going into it. But that detail, the crispy chicken detail, I'm really happy that you said that.
It's all about the crispy chicken. Like that's kind of the nickname we had for doing exploit. It was like not enough crispy chicken or too much crispy chicken.
I'm gonna like put that on a poster on the wall. It's like a scale that someone can slide. It's like not enough crispy chicken. That's good. That's great. So I've got a couple explosion fun facts just to kind of sprinkle in here. So in James Bond, obviously, Spectre, directed by Sam Mendes. As far as I know, they still hold the largest on-screen explosion in one sequence that takes place.
Yeah, I think so.
In that, over 2,000 gallons of fuel and nearly 100 pounds of explosives were used in this single shot. And what are your thoughts on that whole shot, Urban?
That's great. I love it. It's so good. And apparently it was actually done with the actors being there, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the actors were not green screened in. Yep. Like they literally exploded and the explosion was behind them. I think I saw like a behind the scenes where the actors were saying that it was really hot behind them. Like you would know with that there's an explosion behind you because it's so freaking hot. Even though it was way far away from them. Yeah, I wish I would be there. Because it's beautiful.
I imagine that would be an experience for sure. And I mean, I can attest to even being, 100 feet plus from some of these large gas explosions that we've had in like a field.
Yes.
And you just still feel so much heat off of that. We filmed some in like the winter and it was so cold, but anytime that would happen, it's just like, oh, that's nice. And then you're like instantly freezing again, which is funny. But I was kind of comparing the final shot on that VFX. Well, yeah, there was some VFX on that sequence, even though the majority was practical. I think the VFX came in with like set extensions and kind of making, the facility look larger. But when I was kind of comparing the two, I was just noticing all of the different like subtypes of explosions were in there. So there's a lot of gas explosions, obviously, those big fireball type with a lot of detail, a lot of crispy chicken.
Yeah.
So very high amounts of crispy chicken. And then I also noticed those spark trails that were kind of included in there as well, just to add some more detail. And then in a couple areas of that, it's almost like because it is in like the desert. I think it's like Morocco that it's set in and takes place. But there's also a couple really big impact blasts. So like that dust and dirt, debris type coming up that we already talked about. So it's really cool that they've been able to have a shot that's so large, but also have all of the practicality of, we're going to get all these different classifications of explosions in one sequence, and to just be able to coordinate that from a technical side, from a pyrotechnician side, I think is, and you said like all of this is an art, but it's just amazing that there can be so much level of planning and detail on, well, this is the direction this is going to go, and we have this over here. I know that we use different mixtures specifically to, material.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, like, how do you, because you have real world experience, like what's the different mixtures that you use on the emitters, I guess? Are they called emitters? Yep.
Yeah. They may as well be. So it's just the different locations. I'm going to be a little vague on specific, like,
like
number amounts and details of things. Do not try this at home. Please. Don't try it at work either.
Just don't try it at all.
Just don't try this, period, unless you come and visit us, and then we'll have a good time. But we'll also be super safe. So there are a lot of, again, trying to tiptoe around like some industry, more protected things, if you will. But so basically you'll have a container, and this is for our gas explosions. You have a container. It's usually pretty large, very durable. And then it will actually dig out, like if we're shooting in a field, we'll dig that out because the impact is going to force it down anyway. So we kind of reinforce the area where it takes place, where the impact will just not really move the container because it's rested in the ground already. So again, I'm doing this, but it's like much bigger. So you got to dig some huge holes, and then we'll generally use a mixture of black powder, a mixture of gasoline, and then in some cases propane. And all of those are kind of finessed back and forth to create different levels of lift that comes up. So if, the explosion's not high enough, then you'll actually stagger the materials in a different order or a different way. Because you don't want it all to just explode on the ground. Yeah. And so you want it to kind of throw the gasoline up, and then it'll ignite as it goes.
Yeah. Do you tinker with the amount on the day? So, and do you guys then do multiple versions to know like how to set it up?
Yep. Yeah. So as best we can, we'll try to keep notes, of past things, so we have a pretty good idea of starting points. And that will kind of inform, because if we're on set, the explosion itself has to look good, but then the technical side has to meet. So it's really these two disciplines that come together, because we're constantly going back and forth of, okay, this one was really good, but it wasn't high enough, and so it doesn't really feel as big as it could, or maybe it didn't lift the right way. And then we'll also include some other directional things just to kind of force the blast to take place. And so if we have one center piece that's round, then maybe behind it we'll kind of have two large tubes that are essentially doing the same thing, but they're kind of just shooting gasoline out across the side, just to give it some more trail, some more characteristics as it ignites and kind of just engulfs the sky.
So like you are art designing the explosion in a way to make it look good, right? Because like I was saying, not every explosion is going to look good, even if you have a ton of gasoline and you just blow it up. It might just be like a huge ball of smoke.
That just sits on the ground and doesn't do
exactly.
Yeah. So there's a lot of art direction that comes into that. And I will say our CEO, Rodolphe, has done a great job every time on set of knowing exactly what he's looking for and how that kind of pertains down the line to post-production. And it's especially the very first shoot that we had. So we actually traveled to Chicago to film on set with some pyrotechnicians that we had met So we were on a studio backlot, and to my knowledge, we'd never done that before. That was really my first time working with Row, trying to figure out, okay, so we're making products that are explosions that we're going to sell to a lot of people. So there's just a lot of different things kind of in that process.
Yeah.
But I quickly realized that we were doing something on a scale that other people hadn't done before.
Yes.
And that's why there wasn't a clear, so at this point you need to do this and this.
Yeah.
And, a step by step. It was more of like, because we got there and the explosions were not good. And it was kind of like trying to art direct as best as we could, but it was still, the supplies weren't really the right way. The pyrotechnicians, I think they did the best they could, but it was really hard for us to convey and communicate, having never done that before.
Yeah.
Can you make it more round and big in this area? And they just kind of look at us like, what are you talking about?
You're gonna tell me doing this for 20 years.
Yep. So thankfully we were able to kind of bring things back to our own area, just because cost of production is much less. And then kind of coordinate based on that, so we would have some more time to trial and just kind of figure things out. But that was a really interesting one. And it was like filming, those were actually filmed on the Sony FS7. And so we shot them in 4K. They still looked beautiful. Like it's just fire and detail. But comparatively, like looking back, is like, this is complete trash. We would never do anything like this before. And those actually, I think out of that entire shoot, we have maybe 2 or 3 clips that are on our website currently. And outside of that, we just scrapped everything. Because it didn't meet our quality standards. We were able to kind of use it enough to pitch a concept through Kickstarter, so people were able to see like, okay, they're serious about stock footage. And we always joke, because it's like, at the end of the day, we make stock footage, so it's like we're not doctors, we're not curing cancer, we're not doing anything super crazy. But at the same time, like, we do take that very seriously, and we just make it as best as we can, because go big or go home, right?
And I think the FS, I used to own an FS7, so I know what it can do. But the dynamic range, especially unless you guys had the extension that allowed you to shoot in 10-bit 444 ProRes. But if you guys didn't, then you didn't get the dynamic range needed that you would get with a red
And
camera.
even though, because that camera comparatively, especially at the time, because this is 2015, did have one of the highest dynamic ranges. But I'm actually not even sure if that was released at the time, because it was still pretty new. But looking back with like the red and stuff now, it's like, there's no way we'd film anything without having like 14, 16 stops, whatever ours goes up to now. It's crazy.
And it's like 8K. What red are you guys using right now to shoot?
So we filmed a lot of our old stuff, and if we have a bigger shoot, sometimes we'll get different sensors just for whatever makes the most sense for that. But we do have the red Gemini body, so that's the one I've got hanging out right here. And it does 5K. Generally, we'll do like 5K at 96, because that's a pretty good like middle of the road. If we're doing 8K, depends on the effect, but a lot of times that's just like way unnecessary, considering you still have plenty of resolution if it's shot the right way, of course, and all those other things.
Have you guys done any super slow-mo with like phantoms?
So phantoms are definitely on our list. I'm still surprised at like how expensive it is to rent. Whether that's a Phantom or something equivalent. It's like, man, we could rent how many reds for this and do multicam setups on other things. But I do really want to make sure that we can have some ultra high speed stuff before too long. Again, it's more of just, there's interest there, but it's really hard to justify spending that much money up front. Maybe we'll do a Kickstarter type campaign for like, hey, help us fund this thing that we're wanting to do. That way we can actually make it happen.
Because slow-mo shots are not used that much. I mean, like in most movies or in most TV shows or people would just use like a, like an explosion in real time.
Yeah.
You want that impact to feel impactful. Like slow-mo is very specific in movies. So yeah, I know. I probably watched the slow-mo guys as well. They do some crazy explosions. They're having fun with.
I could watch that channel for hours, and I do.
I do as well, just for references. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and anymore too. If we're doing 5K at 96 frames per second, if your final deliverable is at 24 frames, that's still a decent amount of frames in there that you can kind of step down from.
Yeah.
Not to mention like some of the advancements we've been playing around a little bit with, like machine learning, optical flow.
Yeah.
And how it like interpolates frames in between. Frame A and C to create.
You can do some. Yeah.
And it's getting so much more sophisticated that it's things like that where I'm like, could we get by without, renting a Phantom and doing some high frame rate stuff a little longer? Probably. But
that's how essentially how you do explosions for real-time stuff, because I did that as well. And you just render out like 16 frames of the whole explosion and just you put it through an optical flow, displacement essentially. And then you almost get like 128 frames. Sure, if you go super close, you will see like the blending between, but it's very nice for like medium ranges. But then your 16 frames can be of a higher resolution because of it. So that is more important than having, 128 frames or like 64.
Yeah.
That's why I hate in real time, because you have to be you have to optimize everything to the bone. And then you're like, you have to be careful about resolutions and how many frames you're gonna bake. And my God, I want the full quality.
It's a totally different line of thinking of how you approach projects, and it's almost you have to relearn because it is so different. Of, as you said, optimizing down to the bone, and it's a different world. I like it, and I think understanding the multiple disciplines there can really bring a lot to a final composite or sequence or whatever you're working on. But it is a lot. Like, I'm glad that there are other experts in the field, and I'm not the lid for that.
That's for sure. No, it is fun. It's just it's double the work, and then you sacrifice the quality every time. I mean, even though like with stuff that they did for the new Battlefield game or even Call of Duty, dude, like they have some next level explosions in Call of Duty and Battlefield, just like FX in general. And I wonder how that is even running. Like they need to optimize so much to get to that quality to run it. That's impressive.
It really is a beautiful thing, and how they've been able to make so many advancements. And I've been able to have a little bit of insight, nothing that I can like share too specifically on, but I can speak to them just really doing a amazing job and going over and above at that optimization, because that's the only way you can get your engine to do what you want it to do. Is everything has to be extremely lightweight but also look as good as it can. Where's the middle bar for that? And then go there. But I mean, every asset, every texture, it's amazing, honestly.
It is.
So I've got 2 more really fast fun facts for explosions, because I wanted to make sure we got these in because they're fun. So die-hard explosions are nearly 100% practical. That may not be news to anybody. I just think it's fun to have in there. And the final one that I thought was pretty fascinating is there was one scene from Transformers 3, The Last Night, that cost an estimated $15 million between the CGI and explosions. $15 million for a scene. I just imagine someone sitting in the pitch room with the CFO, and they're trying to whoever's managing the budget for that, and it's like no, you don't understand. I need 15. It's got to be 15 because this is going to be the most beautiful sequence that you've ever seen.
So how long is the shot? No. It's 30 seconds long. So you're telling me each second is going to be 0.5 million? Kidding. It's not how.
And then they turn around and see what box office sales look like, and they're like,
yeah, 50 million. Next time, 30 million.
Yep. Yeah. So and that is just fascinating on a lot of levels, but just, I think the more that we can, as a company, you as an artist can continue to think in that realm of how can we continue to equip people and build tools or, courses or anything that can more quickly save people time to get that same end result.
Yeah.
And so it's like, obviously this happened before we were around.
Yeah.
But I'm like, man, I wonder if we could have shaved off like 2 million if they would have spent $300 on their website. I don't know. But even being able to still have that component of realism for extremely low cost, I think it's really fascinating, and I'm honestly just honored to be able to do that for people. And when I get to speak with artists one-on-one and they talk about how they're able to make it home at night to see their kids because they were able to finish the shots that they had on their plate for the day.
Oh, dude.
Like, that's really the stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning. It makes me reinvigorated and excited to get to work and continue to innovate and build things that don't exist yet. Because it's all about helping people work better, tell their stories better. And like there's nothing better than that. And it's so cool to see you doing that throughout your career. And we joke a lot. It's explosions. It's funny. But there really is a lot of value, I think, into just the art and medium of storytelling and how we can help elevate that for other people. So really appreciative of having you on this episode, Urban, and just amazed by the work that you're doing, you and the team at Rebelway.
Thank you.
And last question I had is, where can people find you? So your personal stuff as well as Rebelway.
Yeah, so I'm mostly active. I'm not super active on social media, but I am active on LinkedIn. If you just type Urban Bradesko, you're going to find me. And Twitter, the same thing. I think my handle is, dude, I don't know what my handle is. At Bradesko, I think.
Nice.
But yeah, and then rebelway.net, that's where I spend most of my time at currently. We're building new workshops. It's going to get even more explosive very soon. We're doing something like it's a next level project. Like what we're trying to do is, I feel like this next one, I don't want to overhype it, but this next thing that might come out, I'm not going to say anything, but this next thing is going to be, it's going to push the level of education. It's going to be
is killing me.
Dude, it's going to be the absolute peak of educational material when it comes to CG. The absolute peak. That's how I feel. I'm so excited about it. Like, I cannot wait. And we're working, like we're busting our asses, honestly. I don't like working too. I work a lot. Like, we probably all work quite a lot just because we enjoy what we do. It's a different type of work. Like, we can work 12 hours, but it's different than that tedious work. But I don't encourage working too much, but for this one, we are really busting our asses to make it like the next level.
That's killer. And is there any, like, is that due next year sometime? Any rough timeline on that?
Probably next year. I feel like it's going to be, because we're still rendering stuff and it's taking like how much, how long
I can imagine it would take a minute.
Was it like 10 hours per frame?
Oh my gosh.
Dude, I'm telling you, it's absolute peak.
Yeah.
It's the absolute
That's going to be
peak.
killer though. That's going to be killer because you guys have the track record. I know that whatever it is you put out is going to be extremely dope. And really looking forward to it. Again, ladies and gentlemen, Urban Bradesko, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Ask an Artist, Anatomy of an Explosion. As I said, there's not many people that I would be like, hey, let's have on the podcast and just talk about explosions and fire and details and intricacies of that. So thanks so much for joining us, Urban. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, likewise. It was fun.